Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Josh here. Welcome back to our morning meditations. I hope you had a great night's rest again. Happy Wednesday. We're halfway through the week, and hopefully another day closer to getting back to normal. We concluded our study in the Beatitudes yesterday with the eighth Beatitude. But I mentioned in yesterday's video that there's actually sort of a ninth transition beatitude that I want to touch on today to transition us into the study of the parables. But before I do that, I just want to continue with a couple more thoughts that I was having about yesterday's beatitude, the eighth one, which is blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I was doing some more reading later on, and I realized that there's another really important aspect that I didn't share with you, and that is something that Jesus refers to as dying to self. And what does that mean? That's a whole discussion in and of itself, but essentially, dying to self has to do with the real you and the false you. So it has to do with identity. And we have these identities that we've acquired just by living in the world, being who we are, our professions, our jobs as mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and grandparents and so on and so forth. That's our worldly identity. And our ego is built around that identity. And then there is another identity, sort of the original identity of who we are in God's eyes, our soul. And so what Jesus is getting at in this aspect of this beatitude is liberation, is freedom from the false self, this sort of false identity. False not being bad necessarily, but just false in the sense that all of these things, these worldly things, have a bearing on who we are in the world. But remember, Jesus has called us out of the world. You're no longer of this world, he says. And so that's an invitation for us to get to know the deepest self, the self that exists apart from the ego, apart from all of this constructed self, right? It's like the most pure you. And so what he's saying in this final beatitude, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Essentially what he's saying is, blessed are you who in the midst of persecution, who when the people who hate you are pursuing you, even to the core of your being, can't find you anywhere. That person is truly blessed. It gets pretty complex, but the Wave Tops version is that it has to do with recognizing what really matters and what doesn't matter at all. And most of the things that we fret about in life, they don't really matter at all. It's the deeper things, all the things that tie back into love and compassion and grace and mercy. All of those things matter because all of those things are attributes of God, and they exist in us inherently. Now, after he says this, then he goes on to deliver this ninth sort of transition beatitude. And he says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, this is interesting here because he goes from saying in the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are those for hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, blessed are those who are persecuted. And this one is distinctly different. Now he's making it very specific and very personal to the disciples. He's saying, blessed are you. Blessed are you when you are persecuted, because they persecuted the prophets in the same way, just like they're going to do to me. is what Jesus is saying. So essentially, those who are being persecuted, who are hungering and thirsting to be more like Christ, um, the blessing is in the persecution itself, because they're growing closer and closer to being like God and the prophets. Righteousness, if you will. Now, does that mean that we should seek out persecution to become more like Christ? No. It's kind of a byproduct of what happens when you experience that inner transformation, the spiritual shift that Jesus is invoking. Now, after that, he goes into saying, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. And then he talks about light. So salt and light. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. And that is pretty much all of Matthew 5, 3 through 16, if you want to go and read it for yourself. So here kind of begins like these cryptic sayings. Those ones are pretty straightforward. Salt and light. Salt is a preservative, preserving life, preserving truth. It's also a flavor enhancer, so enhancing the flavor of your life, living it to the fullest. I mean, light, darkness, those are all pretty easy to understand. But some of the other parables are not so easy to understand. And it's important to understand what a parable is and what it isn't. So a parable is, first of all, it's not like a fable. It's not like a story with a happy ending or something like that. A parable is designed to be destabilizing. It's designed to be cryptic. It's designed to be challenging. And the only way that you fully understand the parable is by sitting with it and praying about it and chewing on it and discussing it, letting it seep in and just letting it sit and marinate for a while. It's destabilizing in this way because it isn't easy to just take in and understand right away. It's sort of a gift that keeps on giving. The more time you spend with it, the more you learn from it, and the more it begins to shape you and shape your understanding and open up your vision in the way that you see the world. We know that it's like this because, first of all, there's so many parables that like the church just doesn't really do anything with. I mean, they seem to kind of contradict one another. And we're going to unpack all of those over the next couple days and weeks. But I just want to point very quickly to the notion of it being destabilizing in Scripture. And we see it with the Pharisee Nicodemus, who goes to see Jesus. And he says, teacher, rabbi, tell me, what's the deal? And Jesus essentially tells him that he needs to be transformed, right? He needs to be born again. He needs to be born again from above, from water and the Spirit. And then he will be able to sort of enter in or experience this transformation. And I mean, can you imagine that? Like Nicodemus goes and he's seeking his counsel. So yeah, it's very, very destabilizing for him to hear this. In fact, we see it in the Scripture that he's deeply confused, and he says, "What is this? How can a man be born again? I'm a grown man. Like that doesn't work. It doesn't work." So when you see it, when you hear it on the surface, the destabilizing element is designed to be sort of a blow to knock you off of your traditional way of viewing things and hearing things and even understanding things. And it's an invitation to calling you into something deeper, to an experience with the actual teaching itself, to let it do its work from the inside out, particularly up here. And so I'll get into this a little bit more tomorrow, but in an effort to keep these little meditations short, I just want to begin with that sort of as an introduction to the parables. So think about that today. We've talked about a lot in a very short amount of time, but think about the blessedness of those who take in these Beatitudes and the parables and let them do their transforming work from the inside out. I love you guys, and I'll see you right here tomorrow.